Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of P.O.D TV on Roku, World Edition. We are now on the Roku TV network. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the Research Triangle Park, the 8th largest state in the United States of America. And we welcome you from wherever you are in the world to engage with us every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States of America, and anywhere you are around the world, to talk about global affairs, innovation, and a move towards the end of this pandemic or a new phase of this pandemic. In California, they're now calling it an endemic. We're going to talk about that later today or next week. Today, we will continue our discussion of Ukraine before I bring on our panel. The state of the war continues. Significant attacks on infrastructure in major cities like Mariupol, where Russian bombers attacked a hospital and a maternity ward. Continued attacks are drawing the water, the energy, the electricity, the infrastructure, and millions of Ukrainians continue to flee, many going into the nation of Romania. Russia and Ukraine have announced a tentative agreement yesterday to open humanitarian corridors in 6 cities. And there was a meeting yesterday. The foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine met for about 90 minutes in Turkey. That was the highest level talks since the war began 2 weeks ago. But they did not reach a deal to end the war. One of the issues that came up was Ukrainian independence, but they remain far apart on that issue. And the Kremlin continues to accuse the United States of waging an economic war. And Russia's currency has lost about 40% of its value in a month. I wanted to end my monologue with a very emotional story that brings us in perspective. I got this in the New York Times this morning from an article, and it was a very, very moving article, so I want to share it with you all. Bear with me. There were 4 victims found just a few days ago in the Ukraine. And it's the story of the Perbanis family. Tatiana Perbanis was an accountant and her husband Sergei a computer programmer. They had already escaped war in Ukraine. Until 2014, they lived in eastern Ukraine, and they fled to Kyiv after Russia formed a separatist uprising in the east. They met in high school, became a couple years later when they met in a dance club, and they owned a Chevrolet minivan and shared a country home with friends. They were dedicated gardeners and skiers. A few weeks ago, before the situation in Kyiv got even worse, Tatiana had a company and she rented rooms in Poland and encouraged employees to use them. But she did not want to leave until she had a plan to evacuate her mother, who had Alzheimer's disease. Around 7 a.m. on Sunday, Tatiana and her children began their journey, while Sergei, the husband, was trapped in eastern Ukraine tending to his ailing mother. By mid-morning, Tatiana, Mikita, and Alisa had all been killed, alongside the church volunteer, Berzy. Sergei is now without a family, and he says the whole world should know what is happening here. Real lives, mothers, children, being murdered and killed at the will of an authoritarian, maniacal dictator, Vladimir Putin. It's hard to get positive when you start a news show with that kind of an emotional story. I'm fighting back the tears because I don't want to break down an emotion as I run this podcast. But the reason I shared this story with you today is that this story of the Perbanis family demonstrates the sheer humanitarian murder and crisis that is going on in this nation of 40 million. We can stand and be indifferent and watch the images on the TV. But what if that had been our mother, father, or children, or sons or daughters, murdered and killed for no reason other than a ruthless dictator who wants to steal away their independence? It's wrong, it's evil, and it must be stopped. And I today, as the host of this show, am going to call it out for what it is. There is no excuse. There is no room for this kind of behavior in the world order. What will we do about it? Well, Vladimir Putin has no plans to change. He says more civilians will die until he takes over Ukraine. That's the bottom line. We will be talking about this today on this show. We are proud of Ukraine standing up for freedom and democracy. Today, I bring with us on the show Mark Lee and others who are joining. Sasha Starr probably will join us.
Yes, Sasha's here, and we'll bring Sasha up, and definitely he'll be joining us as well in this powerful conversation. And like you said, it is definitely some sad times here in not just America, but in the world. And of course, we do have our voice from Canada, who is a master chess player as well as a master investor. So always glad to have his insight, and definitely the insight as a son of the Ukraine, being one that was born in one of those cities and all of that. So he definitely brings us a great perspective.
And Sasha, and like I said, I had to sort of change my monologue today, but today my goal was to speak to the hearts, the hearts, the hearts of those listening to this show, watching the news reels, going to bed at night knowing that there's some child, there's some mother, there's some little kid that's being murdered in the streets of Ukraine. And some of them are fleeing to Romania. I'm fighting back the tears right now, guys. I cried actually before I did the monologues. I usually practice twice. And I had to get the emotion out. But Sasha, we pray for you because I know this is hard for you as an analyst on our show and also someone that has ties to Ukraine. I know you grew up in Russia. I hope I did okay today, but I wanted to get out the human heart of it. What is going on here? This is atrocious. Anyway, I give Sasha Star the floor.
Thank you, Steve. It's unreal situation actually what's happening now when the whole world watching in real time as innocent civilians, women, children are being mercilessly killed. Just it's not something that they made a mistake or they just misfired or something like that. It's going systematically. It's a genocide of, there's no other words to describe them. Just indiscriminately kill civilians, children, women is it's atrocity, which I'm trying to, I'm a student of history, and I'm trying to find equivalent of whatever happened on this scale and magnitude, and I fail. I fail to indicate, to find anything what comes close to what's happening right now.
I mean, it's appalling. I had a hard time sleeping last night when I see these images, and I don't know whether part of me, is when you get older, it's easy sometimes to say, well, that's not me, it's far away in land. But imagine if you lost your wife or I lost my wife or my children, how would that make me feel, right? And so we need to put on our global consciousness to say that this is wrong. Sorry, Sasha, I didn't mean to.
There are also practical implications of that, because if you see the Russian way of conducting warfare, same thing happened in Chechnya, in Grozny in 1995 and then 2000s. And then see what they're doing. They're creating rubble. They're killing everything inside. They did it in 2008 in Georgia. It was a short incursion, but it was merciless, killing everywhere. And this is, unfortunately, if Putin, Russia are not stopped now, that's what's awaiting European cities. That's how they're gonna fight. So complete annihilation of cities, of its citizens, women, children. That's what's awaiting the West if Putin is not stopped. What the West can do to stop Putin?
I mean that, and I'm going to go to Mark Lee, but I'm going to interject here. That's the key, right? And I was arguing with this with my mother over dinner yesterday. We were talking, right? And now I'm starting to feel like, so I draw the analogy on my last monologue a few days ago of Kuwait. Very different situations. Kuwait much smaller. Ukraine about 40 million people. Yes, Russia is a nuclear power. It's always scary. We don't want a nuclear World War III, right? But with Kuwait, we led under our president George H.W. Bush a UN resolution, and we said you don't attack an independent country, and we drew a coalition of forces, and that happened 48 hours. Within 48 hours, Iraq had already moved in to take Kuwait. Here we had a lot of months. We knew the buildup was happening. It's just my opinion. Part of me is just like, you know what? Sooner or later, is it worth sending troops over there? I know my mother and I argued, no, you're going to go to World War III, everyone's going to die. But what do we gain by standing and allowing this ruthless dictator to murder innocent people in Ukraine? And we keep saying sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. He's not listening to the sanctions. And my biggest fear, and I'm going to let Mark Lee jump in, is what happens now if China says, I'm going to invade Taiwan, even though Wilmer Leon said that's not going to happen. How do we know that? How do we know that North Korea is not going to invade South Korea? How do we know India is not going to say, well, I want to go take back Pakistan. I want to take over Kashmir, right? I mean, this could activate sort of a thing. Well, if you know what my last point is this: where would World War II, where would we have been if we said, okay, Hitler, we're going to give you sanctions, but we're not going to stop you. He would have taken over the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia. Well, he already did, right? But the whole thing would have been the Third Reich, right? What do you think about that, Mark Lee and Sasha? Should the U.S.
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. I mean, Sasha said he's a student of history. I try to be a student of history as well. And I mean, unfortunately, the nature of mankind is that it is usually the kind of notion of, you want to have your sovereignty and you want to be in charge of your own country and everything. But throughout the globe, how many times have we seen one country invade another country and try to take over that country? I'm not saying that that's right, but that's been almost like a facet of mankind and a facet of human nature. Because like I said, a lot of times if you have something and there's a resource, then it's oftentimes the desire of the more stronger power to try to get that resource. I mean, we've even seen things from right here in America where that has happened as well. You know, there might have been some resources going on in other parts of the world, and then we tried to move in sometimes diplomatically or sometimes in other ways to gather those resources. So unfortunately, it's just part of human nature, and I don't know that that will ever change. But I wish it would, but then again, you know, I'm a idolist in some ways because I do like the old song Imagine a World with No War and things along those lines that John Lennon sang. And definitely there's some other songs that are in that same kind of spectrum that I'm a big fan of as well. But unfortunately, that is a desire, and sometimes they even say religious people have those desires. But then you look at the Crusades and you see that even some of our religious history has gone in that direction as well, because you wanted to try to encourage people to practice whatever the religion was, because it's been just about all the major world religions have had a crusade of some sort or another where they've tried to get the people that are not practicing their style to actually go in there, and all along those lines. I was going to bring up something really quickly along with what you just said as well, and then I do want to hear what Sasha's got to say as well. But they did say that this is leading to, we were already stressed, meaning Americans, because of COVID. And apparently there's a study out now by the American Psychological Association that says the financial woes coupled with those scenes that you're talking about from the Ukraine as Russia continues its invasion have pushed the majority of Americans to an unprecedented level of stress. And that was from a new study that just came out today from the American Psychological Association. So, well, actually, it looks like it was published last week, but it says that after being weary from the 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now you're adding inflation, you're adding the war in the Ukraine, you're adding the very real possibility of World War III, and you're adding things like gas prices and groceries going up as well. So a lot of folks are facing some very severe stress and all of that. So they're wondering what kind of impact that could have just on our well-being, our healthy, both physical health as well as mental and emotional health as well. So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts about that as well, because a lot of folks, as Nick has pointed out, and I think Sasha has pointed out, can't even find enough money to survive on. And I'll leave it at that point.
Yes. Before we go there, Sasha, what do you think about what the U.S. response should be, or should it have been? Do you believe that we would have been better to actually pull together an international coalition and go in with some forces? Would we have risked nuclear war, or do you think it's worth? Well, obviously, it's hard to do that with Afghanistan, they'll pull out, and the timing of sending our troops over. But do you think this could have been handled differently, or do you believe that it would have happened no matter what we had done?
I think it's about time to start learning from Russians. What Russians are doing, for example, in Syria just a few years ago, they had troops, professional mercenaries on the ground, so-called Wagner group, which is operating in Ukraine, by the way, right now too. However, they were always saying that no, we don't have any army there, we don't have any soldiers or so on. So they were portrayed, although they were real Putin's soldiers, but they were portrayed like some kind of independent people. Well, they decided they traveled to Syria, and probably they want to stay there for some time. Then they will come back. Maybe they will not come back. Whatever, it depends. Um, However, it was very substantial force because they all were very well trained professionals, and they were very effective. And yet, Russia was successfully denying even their existence. So, if the West could assemble army of course, people who are well trained, well equipped, and willing to fight for the cause in Ukraine against Russians. I think that should be encouraged. It would give the same clout as U.S. officially, neither U.S. or NATO, participating in the war. However, they will have very substantial, very effective troops on the ground, and this way, Russia is getting weaker and weaker by each day as we speak. Eventually, Ukrainians will win, but just stop these enormous casualties among the civilians. That what should be done, and I'm sure that there are already 20,000 or more mercenaries already in Ukraine fighting against Russia. That number would increase to 50,000. That's the end of the war. Out. Period. That's what West should do.
That's a really great advice, and I think that it's really, I think, also been a wake up call, right? That Europe has been sort of what they call the sleeping giant, right? That's now sort of waking up. We got sort of caught on our laurels, right? I mean, Europe's been strong economically. Of course, Russia's military is stronger than theirs, but they never really focused on building out the military or looking that this could happen. Perhaps Europe could have been more prepared. NATO could have been prepared for this. The European Union could have been prepared for this. Certainly, it would have been nice to have, more assistance helping Ukraine in that area of the world than just having the Ukrainians defending their airspace on their own. Now, I'll go to Mark Lee, but then I want to come back to Sasha. Yeah, well, Sasha already answered the question. The longer this draws out, we're going to start with Sasha and go to you, Mark. The longer this draws out, they're attacking infrastructure in these other cities, water infrastructure. They're attacking hospitals, maternity wards, going after the civilians. But the longer it draws out, does this hurt Russia? Will they be stuck in not a war as long as Afghanistan, but will it be another war that they're dealing with, or eventually is it his to win, even if it goes for a long time?
I'll tell you, my plan is very viable in terms that Russia is probably as weak now as ever in the Putin's ruling of Russia. I don't recall the times that Russia would be so weak economically, militarily, and right now it's a time to strike at them with all might. However, I understand the idea of waging nuclear war, but I don't think the nuclear war could be real here. The nuclear war is if you know the chain of command, let's say Putin presses the red button, it goes to Shoigu and Gerasimov, another Russian general. Then they have to transmit that to commanders of nuclear submarines, to all the triads, so all command triad, part of the triads, and then it all remains to be seen this command actually can go through. There were already suggestions that the red button on this suitcase, actually it's not working. You press it and something gets stuck and you cannot even press it all the way. And then another suggestion is that button, if you press it really hard, it will bite your finger. And you will just scream from the pain and nothing will happen. Okay, they're all comical scenarios most likely, but still, I'm not so sure that technically all the system with red button would actually work. I'm not trying to convince you to experience it and check out whether it works or not. No, I'm not suggesting that. But if you were not scared, the U.S. was not scared to face Russian air fighters um, in skies over Korea or Vietnam, why then U.S. is so scared not even fight Russians in the air, but even just to send the planes. Actually, I don't even understand the concept. If they're saying sending javelins and stingers and Patriot systems, what makes so big difference between this and planes? Where there is such a fine line that Biden sees it and we don't. I really don't get that. And so this is a really question why he hesitates to do that. But sending armies and armies of well-trained war professionals, and at the same time, uh, you already unleashed such horrible economic sanctions against Russia. Actually, I can't even understand why Russia is swallowing that. That's already a reason for nuclear war, right there. You cut Russia from outside world, no, nothing works. No company pulled away. Their credit cards are not working, or so on. That's already much more than what U.S. did to Japan before the Second World War when they did the oil embargo, and Japan could not stand it, and they almost were forced to attack Americans. Not that I'm justifying what they did, but at least there is a reason why they did that. So what U.S. and the West did against Russia is already well beyond what Americans did against Japan. So how come Russia is not going to war? Are they busy in Ukraine? Oh, that's why. Because almost all their army is fighting now in Ukraine. If somebody will attack like Poland or somebody will attack mainland Russia, they have nothing to defend with. So right now, in a time of weakness, military weakness, economic weakness, people are depressed and annoyed with everything what's happening. There is no high morale. That's a time to inflict as heavy damage to Russia as possible.
Right. This is incredible. Mark, what are your thoughts? I mean, Sasha, you provided some great insight today. We miss Chris and Shaquille and others, and we might be bringing in some other political scientists. But Mark, what is your thought about this? I mean, I think Sasha's given us some good advice about what we have to do, and I think that honestly, for domestic, we're looking at Biden fighting inflation, fighting this war going on. This is not going to be good for his midterm election prospects, even though it's not really his fault. I'm starting to have memories of Jimmy Carter in 1979. inflation, Iran hostage crisis. Looking like Joe Biden might be dealing with the same issue, although it looks like we're coming out of the pandemic. Hopefully, the economy will rebound and we'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the economy will rebound. We're hearing people saying that we can get our own oil and gas from other sources other than Russia and Saudi Arabia, and even though there was quite a bit of the oil that apparently was coming from Russia, but now it won't be. So we'll just have to get other sources. And of course, some people are wondering why we weren't trying to develop our own oil supply in a greater demand before this whole crisis happened and all of that. So definitely there's a lot of that question that is going on as well. So a lot of folks are trying to figure that out. And it's my understanding, and I'm not a military person, but I did have relatives in the military, that quite a few, and I think Sasha had alluded to it earlier, that quite a few of the wars over the last several decades have been actually what folks would consider to be mercenary wars, meaning that there are the people that are in the countries that are there because they are very much impassioned about the freedom that they have and want to hold and things along those lines. But then there are quite a few other folks that come in because they are trained mercenaries. And apparently they've been traveling the world and doing quite a lot of military tactics and all of that for decades. And like I said, I don't know, that's just like an element of society that has been out there for a while and will continue to be out there for centuries to come. But like I said, I'm not a military person, but I do remember hearing more and more of this mercenary class that is out there fighting the wars, and maybe that could lead to a World War III, or maybe not, depending on what their own agenda is and all of that. So, Sasha, I guess that's my question for you, because I've always heard about that in the sense of literary people talking about it, and even in the sense of journalists talking about it. And I do know that there were folks that went to Africa and Asia and the European nations and a number of others that fall from that mercenary class. But are there that many mercenaries that are out there that are really bouncing around country to country to support doing it more as a financial gain, or doing it because of their thrill set or whatever that set might be? Or is that just something that we hear in Tom Clancy novels?
I think it's a combination of both. Some people are motivated because they believe in certain cause. Some people doing it for financial gains. It really depends. It varies, I guess, from country to country. And I don't think you will find a lot of mercenaries to find in places like Uganda or some countries. First of all, they could be easily recognized, and therefore they're obvious targets for other forces. So in Europe, for example, like in Chechen affair, which I remember quite well, there were mercenaries, especially on Chechen side. There were people from Saudi Arabia, from probably Syria and some other countries. Now remember, they're Muslims. They probably look more or less alike. At least they're distinct from Russians. They were quite effective. Russia had heavy losses there, but that's the nature of this warfare. Interestingly enough, when Russia was fighting Chechens for a long time, the first world wars in 1994, 95, then in 2000s. And there were a lot of that war was nothing of what we see now in Ukraine. What they were doing, first of all, a lot of the fighting was not necessarily in Grozny, the capital of Chechnya itself, although there was a lot of fighting too. But there were like outside in different small towns or villages or places. So sometimes they were making deals. For example, Russian could encircle the Chechen battalion. So a Chechen commander would offer Russians to pay, say, $50,000. So they will let them to escape. Of course, for Russians, $50,000 at that time was a very, very good motivational factor. So they would agree and they would let them go. Same thing could happen vice versa. So that kind of a war was there, but nothing of that is happening to Ukraine. Nobody is paying anybody anything, and they're all fighting for their freedom, for their families, wives, children, and none of that is taking place. So if they could amass by now, say 20,000, let's call them mercenaries, although I don't think it's 100% right word in this situation.
Okay.
But it's all semantics. The fact is that there would be 50,000 at the end of war. If all Russian army was 200,000 and they already have well over 10,000 killed, the other are demoralized, they don't have enough supply, they're running out of gasoline supply or food, or they're eating some packages for soldiers dated by 2015, and they're eating that. They're, this column of 40 miles long. The people are getting out of their tanks or military vehicles and going into a forest to hide there, to find some food, to survive. That's the state of the Russian army. This is the time to strike at them. Now,
This
Sounds like it. Definitely the time to strike them while they are their weakest and everything. I actually had a question for both you and Steve, because it actually occurred to me as I was thinking about the rise and the possibility of a World War III and everything. Earlier in the year, even before the pandemic, there was a talk of here in the United States, because of the divisions in the United States, almost us having a civil war, because there's so many divisionary points and there's so much of that talk and everything. And now we're in the midst of a strong possibility of a World War III. Hopefully that won't be the case, but there's still that possibility. I was just wondering, historically, and I don't think it's ever happened in the United States that I can recall, but I was just wondering, is it possible that we could be at a precipice where both events could almost happen simultaneously, meaning that we could go into World War III and a civil war here in the United States at the
I
same time?
well, first of all, let me say this. I mean, and I'll have to jump off here in a second, but the bottom line is that I believe in the United States that I'm a bit of an optimist. I don't believe that we would ever see a civil war like what we've seen in the 1800s, because I think that the institutions of democracy are too strong in America to allow people to get up rifles and knives and just start killing people. I think we do have a good government in the United States. I've called it a liberal democracy, which is one state strong enough to preserve the institutions of democracy, but at the same time respect the civil liberties and freedoms of speech. I think what's made it so divisive is the social media platforms and the Twitter and all these things, where people are more emboldened to say what they really believe than they were maybe before there was these avenues, right? But I do believe that, and then I'll let Sasha go. What's going on in the world is what I believe, and I agree with Fareed Zakaria, a democratic recession. You had a lot of Eastern European and democracy countries and democracies born all across the world, a lot of free elections, fair elections, and so they say, and all of a sudden you're seeing authoritarianism rear its ugly head and return, and it could be that that kind of government is easier. Democracy is advanced citizenship, as Andy Shepard said in The American President, the movie. You got to want it real bad. It's hard work, and it's easier sometimes to just follow one leader to say, "I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to get you food. I'm going to get you bread. I'm going to protect us," right? And that plays on nationalism. So Putin is telling Russians that this isn't an invasion; it's a defense against the Nazis in Ukraine or whatever. He's saying that, right? And people can believe what they want to believe because they want to feel protected, right? And anyway, that's my take on it. So I think the world order has changed tremendously, and moving forward, we're not going to be living in a world where people, countries are going back and saying, "Well, I want to be focusing on my own country," nationalism, right? And that's my biggest fear. I'm going to let Sasha go, but this could happen in North Korea. This could happen. It's already happening in China, and all of a sudden, Britain, and you have all of these, countries, independent nation states. Everybody thinking, and then the only neutral countries you have are Sweden, Canada, our neighbor, right? We get along well with Canada. Sasha, what do you think? Am I onto something here? Or?
Well, Steve, I can agree with you, but I would add something that nothing unites a nation as well as a war. In case of war, all these fights between Republicans and Democrats or all that disappears momentarily. It's not going to be just a fact anymore. So then the nation is united. It's already good. Never mind nuclear war or non-nuclear war or whatever it is. But as long as it's a war, real war, it unites the nation. So right now, surprisingly, I think over 70% of Americans support the no-fly zone over Ukraine. So the people are getting farther and faster united and acting together than US government. So what Joe Biden is so scared to close the sky over Ukraine? He's 79 years old. Okay, so he's has a long life, and he'll die probably in a few years anyway. So what it doesn't matter to him whether it will be nuclear war or not, or so on whatsoever, when this is the time to strike out at your enemy, to do what American failed to do in the 50s, what George Bush failed to do in 1992, but do it now and remain the victorious in this affair.
Sasha, if he does that, because a lot of people are saying, and I mean, even Steve has said it a couple of times. We've definitely heard Dr. Leon say it recently and everything as well. If a war was to be launched, and if the war is as popular, and I agree with you that many people are definitely wanting us to fight against the Russian machine and everything, and if that is the case, is that something that could rescue his presidency? Because I do know that you said that war is big business, and war has also been known to unify people. And if that was the case, then if we're still in the middle of the war, or if we've been successful in the war, then it seems to me that that could totally reverse the course of what people are saying in the sense of his chance of re-election, should he decide he wants to be re-elected. And I do and agree with you that the age factor is something that plays in as well. But whether it's him or whether it's his vice president, Kamala, could going into this action actually help the Democrats' cause?
I'm skeptical about Joe Biden find the strength to actually do the right thing, and actually that, you're right, could save his presidency and even help him to win midterm elections. Kamala Harris, I was very, very positive about her as being the chief prosecutor, and she's very good professional in that respect. But I don't think she's on a level of a statesman who could not even lead the country, but just be anything, part of anything of significance, unfortunately, because obviously she's a good woman, she's a good family woman, of course. But that's not enough for her to be on the world stage, and I think I don't think that she really will go for second term, and probably Biden also won't go. So we will see a new primaries if nothing happened drastically. Democrats will lose midterm elections, probably quite badly, and they will have to hold primaries for next presidential election. So if I were Biden, I would slowly, but not maybe so slow, but at least start preparing country for the war. And over 70% of Americans are believing that the only way to stop all the atrocity is to get no-fly zone. So this is something. Cowardness has no boundaries. So it's one thing to have a no-fly zone over Libya, and another one is over Ukraine. But remember, Ukraine, not over Russia, I'm not suggesting that, but over Ukraine, which is an independent country. So how, in this logic, if it's an independent country, never mind that it's leaning toward democracy, toward NATO and European Union, and so on. So how comes the Russians have the right to fly over Ukraine any way they wanted and do all these atrocities and using cluster bombs and everything else. And on the other hand, US, oh no, 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 we can't fly there. It's Russian. You already recognized Russian right over Ukraine. So Russians have the right to fly over Ukraine. No US, no UK, no. Russia has the right. I'm very very surprised by this stand, and I think I can't believe that it could be justified. Although I've heard the opinion that this way we will risk to upset Russians or some warfare between us and Russians. It's very cowardized excuse, and it has no merits, and it emboldens Putin to go even farther than that. You gave him carte blanche. You say, Putin, just go in, take the Ukraine. We are not going to do no-fly zone or so on. So it's all open to you. You know what? Get your troops just out of there. Send 10,000 bombers and just bomb and keep bombing 24 hours a day until everyone will die. Just please yourself. Go ahead do it. Is that response? Is it doing? Am I missing something?
Hmm. I hear you. That's an interesting response. There's another part of the world that just recently elected a president, and some people say that this could also change the uh, whole political dynamics of the world and that whole kind of like geo dynamics that go on within our world politics. But I was wondering your thoughts because South Korea's new president is taking power, and apparently he's more of a conservative than his liberal incumbent that he replaced was. And there are definitely folks that are wondering about how this will play with the threats from North Korea being high on their agenda, but apparently they've also having rising tensions between South Korea's partners, and in this case, they've got two interesting partners, both the U.S. and the China, and they've also got surging COVID as well as what they are calling a growing gender war. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that part of the world, and will that play into this whole global situation that we're in the midst of as well?
Yeah, okay. So if North Korea has its aspiration to attack South Korea, right now is the time to do it, obviously, because
Mm.
everybody is busy with what's happening in Ukraine. So if they will attack South Korea and China at the same time will try to take over Taiwan, all at the same time. This is the reason why the Japan and Germany were unsuccessful in the Second World War. Not the only reason, but probably the most important one is that uh, Japan, when Germany attacked Russia, and Japan, instead of attacking Russia from the east, and I, I just can't see a scenario how Russia could win such a war being attacked from both sides by Germany and Japan. Instead, Japan attacked United States, Pearl Harbor, and that led U.S. into Second World War. And of course, now the fight was spread all over the world, including the Pacific Ocean and European theater, and so on, and even Africa. So now it's became very, very unclear and muddied. And although over a longer period of time, obviously U.S. led and Russia and the UK forces would prevail. That was quite obvious. It just depends how much time. Um, so in this case, if all that North Korea factor and China over Taiwan and what's happening in Ukraine, if all that happened at the same time, I think the West would be spread very thinly. I really don't see how West, United States in particular, could withstand such a magnitude of attacks in different parts of the world. However, right now, as I suggested before, Russia showed their weakness, economic, military weakness, the human skepticism, and even, I would say, disappointment mildly put over what's happened in Ukraine. I think that's a fabulous time to correct your mistakes that you made in 1991 under George Bush senior presidency.
Question for you: if Russia was to go down, because that's a lot of land mass, maybe not a lot of people, but it's a lot of land mass. Do you think that the rest of the world should divide that country up, or should they try to definitely put in new leadership other than Putin, because we know Putin definitely got to go and all of that? Or are you have any concerns that China, because China is right nearby, could take over that land and even be more of a land mass presence than they already are, because they've already got like billions of people and all of that. And then if they added Russia's land mass, that would be probably like what, maybe a third of the planet or something like that they would have control over, and things along those lines. Maybe not that much, but definitely a sizable land mass that they would control, and they are not that far from Russia. So I guess that's my concern, is that if Russia goes down and we don't help prop them up as we did in the nations that you just mentioned, Japan and even some of the other, Germany as well, that they could easily fall to China. And if they fall to China, then we've got even not just the people problem, because they've already got, like I said, tons of people in China, but we've also got a bigger landmass to deal with as well. But maybe they won't have the ability to manage all of that. But I don't know what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are that the Siberia is already de facto Chinese territory. And I'll tell you why. There are a lot of Chinese people are moving there because, of course, there is a lot of land. If just to give you an example, it's one journalist, well-known journalist. He was flying from Japan to Moscow, from Tokyo to Moscow flying. So when his flight is flying over Japan, there are so many lights, one city after another. It's very well developed territory, of course, as you know, and so on. Then it's flying over the part over the ocean. Then it flies for well over 5 hours over Siberia. No lights, absolute nothing, wilderness. There are no people. There are a few large cities like Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, Kapovaz, but it's just empty territory. So, because they have no people, but so much mass land, a lot of Chinese people, especially men, it's funny, Russian women love Chinese men. Why? Because unlike Russian men who are drinking and beating their wives or so on, Chinese men are very polite. They're very hardworking people. They don't drink, and as husbands, they provide way much better material than Russian men. So there are a lot of families already of mixed race between Chinese and Russians. Mostly it's Russian women and Chinese men. And there is already, even today, if you hold referendum in Siberia, whether it should remain as a part of Russia or join China, they would win referendum easily and would join China as we speak. And a lot of people who are living in, there's a Amur River, which parts Russia and China. So there are a lot of people that are doing crossover business. They're going over the river to China and buying some food products and so on, and bringing and reselling it to Russians in their part of the Amur River on their bank. So it's to me, it's no brainer that if something of that magnitude, that there will be a change of power in Russia, Siberia, or most of it for sure, will be joined China, and not through the war, not at all. There will be just referendums like what they did in Crimea. So there were referendum. You want to join Russia? Yes, we want to join Russia. In Siberia will be the same thing. You want to join China? China? Yes, we do. Okay. Thank you very much. You are free to go. That's what's going to happen for sure.
That's what's going to happen. And I see Nick just popped in. I don't know if he's going to pop into the conversation or not. Yeah, I think he's going to pop into the conversation. I think Steve had already popped out and everything. So we're going to see if Nick wants to come in the last 10 minutes and all of that. There he goes and everything.
Yeah.
I had a question for both of y'all, and it actually comes to something that you love to talk about, Nick, and everything, which is we've been talking about the impending conflict. Well, the conflict that's going on between Ukraine and Russia, and possibly the impending or coming up World War III and everything. But I did notice that the New York Times pulled its journalist out of Russia. And as one that is a media person now and a student of media, I was wondering how both of y'all feel about that, because it seems to me that if you're in the middle of a war, even the Vietnam War, we had our journalists in the middle of Vietnam covering it and everything. So why would you pull the journalists out, since they're the ones that are supposed to be covering this whole madness going on and all along those lines? But I was just wondering your thoughts of the New York Times deciding to pull out its journalists out of Russia.
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, they only got shot.
Okay, makes sense.
Right, I mean, it's real simple. You know, why
Hey,
would
back
they
to
get shot?
this work back in the work thing. I'm going to close out with some insights about the COVID, at least the new changes coming in the workplace and everything. Mark, you let me know when, and I'm back. I'm sorry I was gone for a few minutes.
No problem. Yeah, you got to take care of work, and work is a vital thing. People are still working in the middle of all of this stuff going on and all of that. I did see that there was news apparently in the Indian elections, because apparently Modi's party is winning the biggest prize in India's state elections. So apparently your country of having some connections to is having some good news, because they were saying that Modi's national governing party is set to remain in power in India's most populous state, something called Uttar Pradesh, according to election results released today. Yeah. So they were saying.
Interesting. Other news, the first transplant patient to receive a heart from a genetically altered pig has died 2 months after the surgery. That's interesting. Major League Baseball, U.S. has canceled another week of games. And President Biden signed an executive order aimed at regulating cryptocurrencies. And the House has passed a spending bill that includes billions in aid for Ukraine, but no funding for the pandemic response. And as they close out and get ready for the monologue, adding to the list of companies that are now pulling out of Russia, Netflix, H&M, and IKEA are cutting ties with Russia. Although allies of Putin are arriving on private jets and yachts, and they remain welcome in the United Arab Emirates. But this is no laughing matter as we prepare for closeout. This is
it's almost time for that closeout. It's got just a few more minutes to go and everything. I did have a question for you, Steve, because I just, as I was reading this article, saw that it consolidated the rise of Yogi Adityanath, who apparently is a hardline Hindu monk and has been the state's chief minister for 5 years and is seen as a successor. And I know that here in the United States, we sometimes are not always that thrilled when people have ties to a religious organization, whatever that religious organization might be and everything. So is that different there in India, whereas they are very much liking to have their leadership come from like the hard line of whatever the religious group is? In this case, it's the Hindus. But I was just wondering, because I saw that and it was just kind of like had me giving that puzzle look that I get sometimes. And by the way, just to let y'all know, because I did not put it across there, Shaquille apparently does not like the lyrics of Imagine, because he said that those were some horrible lyrics and all of that, because he was watching on YouTube. So he was just letting us know that those were some dreadful lyrics and all along those lines.
I don't know who Imagine is.
Imagine is the John Lennon song. Imagine a world with no war. Imagine a war.
Oh, that's a Beatles. That's a hippie song. Okay, yeah, I can't blame him. The guy's delusional. Who did it? I think he's on dope or something. I don't know who he is. He's a Beatle
Yeah,
or something.
I think it was John Lennon that actually wrote it.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I will begin my closeout today, if that's okay. I've got to run to Raleigh.
Please.
First of all, I just want to say that that as we get to a new normal, it is definitely a change. It used to be, Fareed Zakaria in his book 10 Lessons of a Post-Pandemic World said, and I've said this quote a number of times, that there are decades when nothing happens and there's weeks when decades happens. And Lord knows, if you look at the last 2.5 years, we've had a pandemic. We elected Joe Biden. We got rid of Donald Trump. We pulled out of Afghanistan. We got inflation. We have supply chain issues. And we have a war in Ukraine. The worst invasion of Western Europe since World War II. With all that being said, some of us are trying to return back to a normal, getting in a car, driving to work, being in an office all day. Not so easy when you're used to working from home every day. And, I think it'll be interesting to see as we move back to new normal. What will businesses function as? Will there be remote work policies for us here in the US and around the world? Will a hybrid work model work? And the only silver lining of the COVID pandemic is using distance learning technologies like this more often so that when we call someone, we don't have to call, we can Zoom. I'll end with a positive story of how the pandemic can bring us closer together. A few weeks ago, our mayor, TJ Cawley, called me, or he actually had someone call me saying a guy named Scott Rao, who was doing business in Morrisville. And he said, my name is the same as yours, but I heard you were Indian, and my brother Steve Rao is one of your Facebook friends. He's an Italian family. We got to talking, and I found out that Scott Rao, he asked me where I was from. I said I was from West Virginia. He goes, I live in Martinsburg. I go, oh, really? My best friend I've known since I was 7 years old lives in Martinsburg. His name is, he goes, oh, really? What's his name? I said, Cameron Duffy. And he said, Cameron Duffy is my business partner. I hadn't seen Cam in 20 years, but I don't have a memory of him in my childhood, any memory in my childhood without Cam Duffy by my side. He became a doctor because he was encouraged by my father. And so lo and behold, I got a call from Cam, my friend. I hadn't talked to him in 20 years. And we ended up doing a Zoom. And it was quite amazing to see his children, for him to see my son, and his children had heard him talk about me over the years. My children had heard me talk about Cam Duffy. They always called us like sort of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer hanging out, a good old West Virginia boy with a young Indian American in the hills of West Virginia. We would get into some trouble, but boy, we had fun. But it tells you, I end with that story because the pandemic has actually accelerated the use of these digital platforms, which in some ways can connect us in ways we haven't been connected before. So only time will tell. But good luck wherever you are, from our family to yours, as we move. We'll talk about that next week on California moving to the endemic. And I'll be in briefly tomorrow to talk to all of you. From our family to yours, be safe. You can get us on Roku TV, and thanks for being with us.